What up? All my scientists, my artists, my philosophers, my geneticists, my roboticists, my biologists, my archaeologists, my astronomers. Let's get busy. This has been Busy from the Burbs. Chip. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Ben Busy from the Burbs, broadcasting to you from Osaka, Japan. I'm joined by no one today. We tried to schedule some guests, couldn't get them on today. Co-hosts are busy, so I'm taking this one. News items. What is there to talk about in the news? There's always a lot to talk about. The unfortunate thing with news broadcasting is that they're so fixated, your typical news broadcasters are so fixated on reporting news stories, and inevitably audiences develop fatigue as a result of constantly hearing what might be old stories, that truly important stories, stories that should take priority, get overlooked. I see this in some images that friends of mine post about how something relatively innocuous like Starbucks not putting Merry Christmas on its cups. How that's a news story, but the fact that 22 veterans every day commit suicide, that's just kind of brushed off as not interesting or not worthy of reporting or not worthy of people thinking and talking about. It's awful. We have this desire for novelty. Either the McKennian kind of, the Terence McKenna kind of novelty. We like new gadgets, new things, things that might not really be new once you drill down. I don't know enough about McLuhan or other philosophers to speak very authoritatively on this. Maybe I need to get Dr. Zach Stein back on the program. But this thing like the internet, has its roots in, maybe the telephone, the telegraph, the teletype machine, which owes its allegiance to, courier mail, right? Which owes its allegiance to, going back before that, smoke signals and so on and so forth, carrier pigeons, the written word. It seems like Nas's quote, "There's nothing new under the sun. It's never what you do, but how it's done," really holds sway there. We want the novelty. We're obsessed with it. We need it. It interests us. Seeing something new or seeing something old in a new way is really interesting for us, and it draws audiences. With that said, though, when you have something rather serious that deserves its allotment of the cognitive load, then there's some injustice there, and there's nothing that you can do really to swing that pendulum the other way. Eventually, I'd like to think that everything that needs to be talked about will be talked about, and everything that needs a light shown on it will have a light shown on it, and for a duration of time that does that thing justice. But I'm daunted by the notion that, or the possibility that this is not the case. Like Zach said in the last podcast, it's a race between heaven or hell, or Aurobindo, he was quoting, if I'm pronouncing that name correctly. We'll see. Today in One other note. Uh, Nassim Nicholas Taleb, author of Black Swan and Anti-Fragility, has said that he doesn't he doesn't watch network news. He doesn't read the newspaper. He doesn't watch the news. He doesn't listen to the news. He doesn't read the news. He he's spoken out. He's rather vehement in his dislike or distaste or dissatisfaction with the news, because he says that anything that's really worth knowing, you don't hear it through the news, through a news outlet, through a newspaper, a magazine, a Twitter. You hear it through word of mouth. You hear it by word of mouth. And he says he's able to reduce a lot of the noise in his input by just cutting that out entirely. But there's something about it that keeps drawing the overwhelming majority of us back to it. Now, with things like the internet, you have this disintermediation. People are fracturing into like slices of market segment. It's difficult to really capture in the traditional sense large swaths of the market that you maybe once were able to do rather easily when there was a limited number of outlets. There were a limited number of television stations. There were a limited number of newspapers and magazines. But now, the advent of the internet, literally, it's like trying to herd cats, and it just doesn't work. Everyone's empowered, and this is good. I think it raises our anti-fragility coefficient. And I'd like to hear from Mr. Taleb what he feels about the internet. He is a user of the internet. He posts frequently to Facebook. He might have a Twitter. I don't know. But I'd be curious to know what he thinks of that. He has been outspoken alongside Yanir Bar-Yam at the New England Complex Systems Institute against GMOs, particularly in the case of monocultures. Jesus, I should go back to school. I've spoken with Dr. Kevin Folta at the University of Florida about monocultures. He said that monocultures have existed for hundreds, if not thousands of years in the banana, probably on the order of hundreds rather than thousands. And although there are issues concerning the future viability of the Cavendish banana, it's been going strong for several hundred years, and he sees no immediate risk to the global banana population. With that said, he also does I think I don't want to say that he said this, but I believe he's of the mind that we need to be exploring other means to preserve our bananas. And what the anti-GMO crowd doesn't like is the fact that, well, yes, you can actually use GMOs to do good as well. I got into a huge argument with a very close friend of mine on Facebook because I felt as though they were dismissing GMOs, and they had to reassert that their position was not that they were anti-GMO, but that GMOs should be used more responsibly. And I tend to err on the side of the geneticists and the horticulturalists and the agriculturalists actually doing the work, that they are being responsible with it. But due to the history of companies like Monsanto in producing dioxin that was then used in Agent Orange during the Vietnam War, they it's and because of their uh because by virtue of their existence as a corporation, that in and of itself elicits a pretty hard anti-corporate response from people. People don't generally tend to think favorably of corporations. I could be wrong. I could be wrong, maybe except for those corporations that they work for directly. I don't know how many people you'll find at Apple talking badly about the Apple, or how many people you'll find at Wall Street Journal talking badly about the Wall Street Journal, so on and so forth. I think the good ones should. I think in any corporation, certainly you'd think that they would have some kind of mechanism built in, either in terms of HR or otherwise, where corporate like self-criticism would be not only accepted but encouraged. And this is what really makes America strong, is our ability to dissent and to allow for dissenting voices. And this is what makes us different than effectively every other country on the face of the planet. The fact that someone like a Snowden, someone like a Manning, in his case or her case is a little bit different, all right, because it drives right at the heart of your dedication to duty and your honor, or not. I mean, it just that it drives right into the root of the nexus of that conflict that exists in the minds and the conscious and in the consciences of any uniformed member of any military, whether or not they are to follow an order, unless that order is illegal. You're not obligated to follow illegal orders. There's kind of there's a conflict there. There's a crisis of conscience that needs to be resolved, and Manning just so happened to resolve it in the way that he thought was the right way to resolve it. Although I support, as anyone in the uniformed military who gives any credence to honor. In the Marine Corps, we say that we are to keep our honor clean. Absolutely, 100%. So in the situation with the Manning revelation, where the attack against I think it was the Al Jazeera camera crew, when that was brought to light, by all means. The thing with Manning was, it wasn't like he saw something that was bad, right? And then brought it to a news agency or brought it to his chain of command or whatever. He actively farmed large volumes of data that may or may not have contained whistleblower level issues. He farmed all of that information and then turned it loose on the internet. That's not a whistleblower. A whistleblower sees something that happens, okay, that is in direct contravention to their own, what they would accept as their what their moral compass is telling them or whatever. And they bring it up to the proper channels. They don't, effectively steal a bunch of information that has nothing to do with an injustice or some type of crime or fraud, waste, or abuse that is being committed, and release that. See, that's the distinction between the Snowden and a Manning. Snowden was much more calculated, um, much more thought was put into what is my intent, what is the end goal, what is happening, what is actually taking place, is it just or unjust, what are the current laws that govern this situation via the FISA court or the Constitution. And after making that analysis, Edward Snowden then went forward to release the information. They're different. They're fundamentally different. Not quite sure how we got onto this with the Snowden revelation, but that's fine. So moving on. Right now, Reuters is reporting that the Kurds report advances in battle to retake Iraq's Sinjar town. You have to wonder what the relationship between Turkey and the Kurds is now, with Erdogan winning a sweeping victory, giving him what a friend of mine in Germany referred to as a shot at dynasty. He says that that's really what he's looking for. Next week, we're going to have another friend of mine from Germany, Julian Everts, on the podcast to discuss his work teaching Syrian refugees in Germany. He's teaching them German, and he's an academic there in Germany, extraordinarily intelligent, and just great with history. And we're going to be discussing the Syrian refugee crisis, the EU, Syria, probably Turkey. There might be some Greece in there as well. We'll be discussing these. We'll be discussing these matters. Let's see, what else do we have? Not a lot else going on, at least in Japan. Temperatures cooling off. Everyone in the northern hemisphere is readying for what always feels like the long winter. I still don't know why we're not more migratory as a species. I guess possibly because it's just too much trouble. Some people are pack rats. By the time they would have all of their stuff packed up, maybe the weather would be changing. Claremont McKenna dean resigns after students protest campus racial bias. So this has been going around recently. At the university, I'm sorry, is it Claremont McKenna Colleges? I know this is a different. Yeah, this is a different one. McKenna podcast. Claremont McKenna stepped down after she sparked a campus protest and hunger strikes by 2 students this week over her email to a Latina student saying she would work to serve those who don't fit our CMC mold. Goodness gracious. Who don't fit our CMC mold. To any executive at any university, I'm going to tell you, you need to be on your best behavior. Your executives, you shouldn't have things like that fall out of your mouth. People will say, well, it's a free country, you should be able to say whatever you want. Yes, unless your the organization that you belong to is a private company, you know, as I believe Claremont McKenna College is. It's not that might not be a state school. Could be, I could be wrong. In any case, when you're in a position of authority, even more so with a public institution, you have accountability to your shareholders, who in this case would be the students and the community. You can't say things like that. Okay? You just can't. Now, should allowances be made? Here we have the ever blurring line between what is private and what is public. We just got finished talking about Edward Snowden and the revelations that he brought up with the government, in that he wants a much more stark line between our public and our private lives. Now, if this individual, Mary Spellman, who was the dean at Claremont McKenna before stepping down, and I will get to the University of Missouri issue after this, I want to discuss that. But if this person had said this in the privacy of their own home, the United States government and probably a great number of the protesters would also want to know. I mean, the United States government, insofar as the NSA's eavesdropping, electronic eavesdropping is concerned, would want to know about this. If you extrapolate it to its, if you take it to its logical extreme, the United States government, by way of the NSA, should be seeking to correct any injustice, no matter how slight, using its electronic eavesdropping, which, by the way, was just ruled unconstitutional by a court. I'm not sure if it's a lesser court, a higher court. I'm pretty sure that FISA is still going to be able to get away with whatever the fuck they want to get away with, and the government's going to be able to look at anyone's dick pic that they want to look at, even in the wake of this court case. But we'll see. Maybe keep hope alive, right? Maybe the justice system still works, even though we're going on 8 years and the Department of Justice hasn't done squat regarding Wall Street. And here we are on the verge of possibly electing one of the worst, and when I say worst, I mean the biggest supporter of Wall Street that's running, in Hillary Clinton. Everything's upside down, topsy-turvy. Anyway, back to the lecture at hand. Perfection is perfection, so I let them understand. University of Missouri, where was I? Claremont College. You just don't say that. You have an obligation to your constituents, and you don't come out your mouth like that. But what's strange is, and you see these historical, and I could be, I don't know. And this could be apophenia. It could be seeing things that aren't there. But it's interesting to note how the NSA and radical invasions of privacy, and maybe the radical extremes in the protest movement, would be in concord. They would be in agreement. The radical extremist protesters would want to know everything that this dean, Mary Spellman, has to say in any racial context. If they could do a Google search through Mary Spellman's personal NSA database, maybe that would be one of the first things that they would do. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm not justifying Mary Spellman's her misspeaking, or otherwise maybe, her misspeaking that is covering up some kind of underlying latent racism. What I'm saying is that it's interesting how there might be a symmetry of will or intent or desire between radical extremist elements within the protest movement and there's no other way to say it, but the radical extreme policy of NSA and the United States government in the now unconstitutional, illegal, what should be illegal, we don't know where that stands, eavesdropping of American citizens' communications. It's interesting to see. University of Missouri. Okay, on to University of Missouri. So, for those who don't know, University of Missouri, there had been reports of an underlying racist or culture of racism or hostile academic environment in which students, black students particularly, were feeling threatened or endangered or uncomfortable, and that the administration was turning a blind eye. And there was a protest. I believe it was started by members of the football team, and they threatened to walk out or go on strike and miss a game that would have cost the university over $1 million. Now, there was a walkout in conjunction with this. I mean, this president, obviously there was an issue, and he let it go. It just went south, and it's his own fault. He should have taken measures. Michael Middleton is his name, 68. Oh, I'm sorry. No, that's the is that the retired longtime administrator at the university? Spoke bluntly, saw on the campus. It crossed my mind. I'm not sure who that guy is. That might be the replacement or otherwise. Anyway, there was a walkout, and there was this incident that was caught on film whereby students were not allowing this purported member of the media, though I didn't see a press badge, do his job, quote unquote. And it was really sad to see on both sides. You had a communications teacher asking for muscle. She says, and I quote, "Can we get some muscle over here to get this reporter out of here?" Okay, by rejecting the media, like, who's going to document it? Like, where do you draw that line? Is it anyone with a camera phone that's capturing any kind of video, any kind of media, that these people should be excluded from the protest zone? Somebody needs to cover the story, lady. Okay? Somebody needs to. It's the story. People want to know about it. You can't just throw the press out. That's ridiculous. Come on, really? That said, that reporter was a moron. He didn't have a hard bone in his body. He was soft. He was made of jello. And there's a way that you can interact with people, but as soon as he became hostile, as soon as he took offense to what they were doing, he put himself outside that perimeter. He did it to himself. I'm sure that there were reporters who, either members of the movement or otherwise supporters, that were inside that perimeter, that were taking all the pictures that they wanted, and that there was no problem. And I haven't gotten the full story on it, but I think the no reporters, no media thing came from an incident that happened earlier in the week. I can't speak to that, though. Man arrested in University of Missouri for threats, had deep interest in Oregon mass shooting. University of Missouri names black administrator with civil rights background as interim president. Of course, I mean, that's damage control. College students confront subtler forms of bias, slights, and snubs. Okay, now this is where it's going to get dicey. A slight and a snub. I read an article the other day that stated that a room that had too many white people in it could be considered what was the term that they used? It wasn't a trigger. I want to say trigger warning. It wasn't a trigger. There's some phrase that that social justice warriors use to describe kind of subtle or subtle or otherwise, blatant, um, what do you say? Blatant racism. And I forget what it was, but the article stated that a classroom that had too many whites in it could be seen as this could be seen as racist. Something like that. I hate that I'm butchering that. Come on, really? Really? Is that where we are? Are we going to racially divide each of the classes such that there is an equal number of every race? What about I don't know, with Chinese Americans? What about Mandarin speaking versus Cantonese speaking, like with their heritage dating back? Are we going to equally divide the number of Mandarin speaking and the number of Cantonese speaking? Or we just let's just get rid of white people altogether? I'm sure that that's an idea that's been forwarded. That's not going to solve the issue. Racism as an issue exists. Yes, that's a fact. But class will divide us more completely. I'm committed to this notion. I'd like someone to convince me otherwise. That class divides us more completely, more fully than race ever could. Race is used as a means to divide people, to fracture them, and to kind of keep them attacking each other so that they don't turn around and focus on what should be, the elephant in the room, which are the upper echelons of you know the wealthy people, the 1%. But I have to be careful here. We have to mince our words because everyone in the 1% is not part of the problem. In the same way that not every freedom fighter is a good person. Some of them are dirty and nasty and are just out downright criminal. We have to mince our words. What are we shooting for? What is the end goal? What are we looking to accomplish? What kind of world do we want in the future? The future. What are you looking to achieve? What kind of world do you want to live in? It's not going to be a race war. It's not going to be a post-apocalyptic wasteland. You need to abandon those thoughts now, because if it was going to happen, it would have happened. Although Nassim Taleb would argue the fat tails there. He might say, well, just because it hasn't happened doesn't mean it won't. I tend to side with Pinker on this debate, but the fat tails argument is such a trump card that can be played to kind of win the argument. What is the future going to look like? There are people in the 1% who want all of the same things that the radical extremist elements of the protest movement want. Positive change, racial, gender, or sexual orientation, equality, love, peace, and happiness. Something has happened with the left where it's almost it's like that Nietzsche quote, like, be careful you who, what is it, battle with demons that you do not become one. And when you look into the abyss also looks into you. There's this bizarre metamorphosis that happens wherein you get radical extremist protesters who are in concert ideologically, strategically with NSA, with a government policy that impinges on your rights as an American citizen, your civil liberties. It's so interesting. I have no words to describe it. It's like a Mobius strip. Mobius sociology. Mobiology. All right, moving on. What's next? So I saw this video, changing gears a little bit, entertainment. There was a video that was posted. I think it's a promotional video for Jadakiss's new project. For those who don't know, Jadakiss is a rapper. Like how I said that. Jadakiss is a rapper, legendary rapper from the Locks. With Styles P, he's a legend. And although I can't say that he's one of my favorites, I do have a lot of respect for Jada and the work that he's done. He's a great artist, he's a phenomenal artist. And what's great about Jada is the fact that he was able to maintain his street cred. Now, someone like me, I didn't necessarily grow up in the streets, in the streets, but when I went to college, I lived in my little northeastern bubble there, and I was active in the activist scene in hip hop and so on and so forth. I have a lot of respect for street cred. That's why I'm not a Drake fan. That's why I fucking hate Drake. Softest rapper in the game. But let's not dwell. That's street cred goes a long way with me. That's why I like the fact with Jada, he never sold out, even though he could have. Jada, he can go to his old neighborhood, and I don't know, of course, Drake can go to his old neighborhood too. It's a suburban gated community in friggin' rural Toronto or wherever the hell he's from. But, okay, that I promise it's the last Drake joke that I'll make in this podcast. Maybe one or two more. We'll see. Jada, and probably other rappers can claim this as well. They have the ability to go back to their old neighborhood, the crucible that birthed them, the crucible in which they were forged as an individual, dealing with all of the stresses and rigors of urban life. And it's so bizarre how what should be a metropolis, a luxury metropolis where you're not having to starve or freeze to death, could evolve its own hardships. But it happened. It happened over the course of the last, close to 100 years, or 200 with some older cities. I mean, there are even older cities in Africa. Some of the first skyscrapers, I believe, on the East Coast of Africa. With that said, the reason why I like Jada is because he has retained that street cred. He can go back to his hometown. I mean, his where is he from? Queens? Where is Jadakiss from? He's from Yonkers. From Yonkers, New York. Really, Yonkers? DMX is from Yonkers too, if I recall correctly. That's why a number of the individuals in this video were actually shouting out DMX. And while I like DMX, and I love the way that he goes after Drake, um, he holds Drake accountable. Hip hop used to be a vehicle whereby the dispossessed and the disenfranchised and the poor could find wealth. They could win wealth. This was the new land, as Zach said in the last podcast. It's the new land. You used to be able to use education as a tool. Now it's just aristocracy disguised as meritocracy. And the same thing has happened in hip hop, man. I have friends of mine who have suffered and have lived in abject poverty and have had to go to the baker. I had to drive a friend of mine, a brilliant musician, a brilliant artist. I would have to drive him to the bakery on Sunday night to get the free bread that the baker was going to throw out because it didn't sell that day, and he was going to use that to feed himself. I did it as a favor to him. He wanted me to do it. I would try to help my friends out as much as possible, but you only have so much money. You have to feed yourself as well. And then someone like Drake, who was born in the lap of luxury. Really nice home. He's got a basement, practically a basement apartment in the basement of his mother's house. In-ground swimming pool. This motherfucker's a multi-fucking millionaire now. That type of injustice really pisses me the fuck off. Where you have people, I know MCs, I know 10 MCs, more lyrical, more gifted musically, better singers than Drake, like by orders of magnitude better. And this is just my personal opinion. You can disagree with me. And if these friends of mine who grew up in the inner city, who grew up in projects, who grew up with child abuse, with gun violence, with domestic violence, who found a way somehow to climb through and survive that horror, the fact that they still to this day have not seen their what's due to them, what I feel is due to them, that fucking pisses me off. When I see fucking Drake making millions of fucking dollars, it pisses me the fuck off. Hip hop used to be about social fucking mobility. You used to be able to use it as a vehicle if you were poor or disenfranchised to get that life that you saw in videos and what you saw your rich white friends or black friends, whatever they were, your rich friends, your sons of lawyers and daughters of doctors, used to be able to use it to get there, or to get it so that your kid could then go on to become that lawyer or that doctor. I have a problem. I have a personality defect in that I, for some reason, and it's only with people like Drake and sinecures, where it's like I can't just celebrate everyone's victory. Why can't everyone win? Why do I have to look at Drake's success with hate? Why do I have to do that? I don't want that to be a part of who I am as a human being. I don't want to hate. I want everyone to win. And when you talk about these larger issues in terms of the future of humanity and post-scarcity and 3D printing, rapid prototyping, and genetic technology and CRISPR and living forever, immortality, those short gains, and I'd like to say that it would be a short gain, and I would like to think that Drake would be of like mind and think that a win for humanity would be so much more significant than an individual win, like Drake's album goes platinum. I've said Drake about 15 times. I'm going to try and make that the last time. All right? How did I get on this topic? Jadakiss released a video in which he goes into this barber shop in his old neighborhood, presumably in Yonkers. And there is a discussion being had by customers inside the barbershop regarding their top 5 MCs of all time. And I think it's about an 18-minute long video, 13 minutes, something like that. It gets to about the 12-minute mark, and finally you hear in the background, mentioned kind of as an aside, Black Thought's name. There were other names that were spoken before that. Big L was kind of brought up in an aside. LL Cool J was brought up in an aside. But Biggie, Jay-Z, Amadeus the Stampede, nah, just kidding. But he's definitely in my top 5. Slim Pickens, Al J, my top 5. SETI, my top 5. Toussaint the Liberator, my top 5. They're having a conversation about their top 5 MCs, and it wasn't until like 13-minute mark you finally hear Rakim's name. You know? I couldn't believe it. I came so close. That name that shall not be named came up when they were talking about Nas, like who has Nas influenced. And they named that name that shall not be named, and Kendrick Lamar, so on and so forth. The case was made that Nas is the greatest MC of all time because he's got lyrics, he's got grammar, he's got stories, and no one else is touching that. I don't know if KRS-One was brought up in the video. I'd like to go back and watch it. Again, it's quite a long video. I'll link it in the comments. Who are your top 5 favorite rappers? Obviously, Ben Busy is number 1 on that list because, let's be honest, I'm basically the greatest. No, sir. Yeah, who are your top 5? I answered a question on Quora one time which asked, who is better, Pac or Big? And I had to give it to Pac. Who's a better MC? Lyrically? Like, just vocabulary-wise. And I'm not saying you have to have an extensive vocabulary to be a superior MC, but it does help. Pac was a much more literary person. He was prolific. Just the amount of recording that he made, and it might not be fair to say given the fact that both of them were killed, Pac and Big were both killed before what would have been the quote-unquote natural end of their lives. So it's not really fair to judge, but I made a pretty, I don't know, I'd like to say it was a, I don't know, I felt it was a pretty good case why Pac was, or is, like Machiavelli's still alive, the better MC. But I'm curious to know, who are your favorite 5 MCs? Who are your top 5? There's quite a few of them. You can send us a message at getbusypodcast@gmail.com. Let us know on the Facebook, who are your top 5 favorite MCs? Maybe you don't like hip-hop. There are a number of people that are listening to this that may have already tuned out. Let's take a look at what else is happening. Fallout 4 was released. I purchased that because it's set in Boston, I believe. So, I want to see it. I want to play it. Rand Paul challenges Bernie Sanders to hour-long debate on socialism versus capitalism. Holy shit. I hope that Bernie takes that challenge. That's the conversation that needs to be had. If there could be some way that Rand Paul and Bernie Sanders could join together, could join forces, if there was some way to resolve, because this is fundamentally the debate that needs to be had. Socialism versus capitalism. If there is a way for these two gentlemen to resolve their differences, or not necessarily resolve their differences, but find a way to take umbrage with like together take umbrage with business as usual in Washington, this could be a game changer. Will Bernie accept the challenge? That's the question. Let's listen.
Really the diametric opposites of viewpoints in our country. And, we've been saying what a fun, dramatic, and informative debate it would be if Bernie Sanders and I could have an hour-long debate. Can you imagine debating over what rights are versus what obligations are?
Yes.
And debating socialism versus capitalism. And debating...
Well, that's a horrible video. It's barely audible, but yeah, that would be incredible. That would be fantastic for the United States if we could make that happen. That would be incredible. Willing to debate Bernie Sanders anytime, any place. Truth and Media subsequently launched a petition offering to host a town hall debate between the two candidates in New Hampshire, which has already reached over 5,000 signatures. That's pretty huge news. What else do we have? Brazil seeks to copy U.S. gun culture to allow embattled citizens the right to defend themselves from criminals. That's a tinderbox waiting to happen. Let's see, what else do we have? Study finds quitting Facebook makes you happier and less stressed. That's news that Facebook does not want you to hear. Also, there's another bit of news I should mention here in the intervening time before we complete the podcast. There is a website called tsu.co, that's spelled tsu.co, and their business model is to share advertising revenue with their users, which is the complete opposite of what Facebook does. Facebook, of course, uses its users to sell to advertisers. Tsu does the opposite, and they've actually been banned now from Facebook. Any link to tsu.co, any mention of their domain is not allowed on Facebook. If you try to do it, it's restricted. Pretty dumb move on Facebook's part. I don't know what they're attempting to do there by restricting that. But it's not going to work. Eventually, if the idea is good, I'd like to think if the idea is good that it will prevail. So we'll see with Tsu. I'm on there. If you want to add me, tsu.co/BenBusy. I am on Tsu. I would love to leave Facebook. I hate Facebook. I'll say it. I don't care. I've hated Facebook for years. I've hated Facebook. The only reason I stay on is because it's a means to an end. It's a means by which I can communicate with my friends. That's it. That's the only reason I stay on. If my friends were not on Facebook, I would not be on Facebook. It's that easy. It's that simple. What else do we have? Maximum rates of climate change are systematically underestimated in the geological record. Researchers have shown that the temperature changes millions of years ago probably happened no more slowly than they are happening today. Very well. Scary to think about. There's a huge conference happening in Paris to decide the environmental action plan fate of the planet. I believe it was to take place this weekend or next week. So I'll be looking to see what developments come from that. What else do we have? In Japan, same-sex couple receives Japan's first partnership certificate, which in Japan, they really don't have marriage in the traditional sense that you'd think. There is a form that's very much procedural. You go to the city hall, you submit some paperwork, much like the United States, only in the United States, I'm not sure if the religious component weighs very heavily or there's some kind of official designation as a marriage certificate. And I'm kind of curious to know whether this partnership certificate, whether that means the same as marriage. Japan is much more accepting of the LGBT community, as I think most places in Asia are. I know that I have a friend teaching Chinese in Beijing right now, and he states that there's a lot of Middle Eastern homosexuals who have come to China specifically to escape persecution in their countries. As you know, the Middle East is not exactly the safest place for a homosexual. It's very dangerous. It's unfortunate that that's the case, but it seems that in terms of government or in terms of civil rights, the Middle East tends to be behind the curve on a lot of that. For a long time, I was homophobic. There's no other way to describe that. I was young and stupid. I was in high school and even through my early years in college. I don't know if you can. Just chalk that up to ignorance. And I've since completely changed my perspective on that. I was ignorant. And I was for some reason there was something inside me that was preventing me from accepting that these are people are just human beings, man. They just want to be happy. They're not hurting anyone. They were born this way. And there's nothing that can be done about that. There's nothing that should be done. So I had abandoned that. So with that said, I can understand where the vast majority of Middle Eastern people are coming from. And I know that I'm painting with a wide brush here. This is a generalization, but let's look at the records of the countries. They're not exactly the safest place for homosexuals. They're just not. That said, I used to be like that. Maybe not so extreme, maybe just as extreme. Of course, I wasn't killing anyone or assaulting anyone. Although verbally, I probably have certainly at some point, said the word faggot, kind of in a pejorative way, with ill intent. I'm not proud of that, but it happened. But I can see how with the Middle East that they haven't evolved this civil muscle. this muscle of civility needs to be evolved over time. It doesn't just get big and robust and strong overnight. It takes a while. Similarly, democracy is not something that you can just shove down someone's throat at rifle point. It doesn't work that way. It needs to be emergent. It needs to happen of its own accord. It needs to happen in its own time. And when we try to force it, it's perverse. You can't force that kind of change to happen. All you can do is kind of set the ground for the transformation and encourage them positively. That's the only way that kind of change can happen. That's the end of our hour, folks. Thank you very much for listening. This is Ben Busy from the Burbs, broadcasting to you from Osaka, Japan. Check us out, getbusypodcast.com. Check us out, iTunes Podcast. Check us out. We're on Stitcher, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever. Hit us up. World peace.